Something which often gets lost when talking about ancient Greek history is the sheer amount of time that we are talking about. By labelling periods as archaic, classical, Hellenistic, or having broad terms such as Bronze and Iron Age, it can be hard to truly comprehend how much time is actually passing through these vague and broad brackets which we have segregated history into. As moderns, we have a tendency of categorising hundreds of years of history as ancient Greek, and lumping social standards, cultural changes, and military technology from this close to 1,000-year span together. It can be very difficult from a human perspective to actually perceive how many years these periods cover. We know that they cover a lot, but to actually understand that and put that into perspective is easier said than done. For a human who can only relate time to our relatively short 80 years or so of life, our perception is skewed, and we tend to dramatically underestimate the length of time we are talking about when looking at historical periods. Let's start by looking very broadly at what many people mean when they say ancient Greek. Here is a timeline with certain key parts of the ancient period, though some of these dates are disputed, such as the Trojan War and when these very loosely structured periods actually begin. For the sake of this demonstration, I've gone with the dates that are sort of most commonly used. It becomes clear when looked at that this period, so often categorised as ancient Greece, spans a near 1,000-year period. From the time of the Trojan War to the birth of Alexander the Great, there is around a 900-year span of time. For perspective, that is about the same as comparing soldiers today to a Norman knight from the Battle of Hastings in 1066. For further perspective, if we look at the time of Leonidas and Thermopylae in 480 compared to the Trojan War, there is over a 700-year span of time. That is the distance from us today to the start of the 100 Years' War. So it becomes clear that when we contrast these dates and events to more modern history, how much time is actually separating what we call ancient Greece. Let's now move our focus to the Archaic period, to the formation of Rome, dialing in our span of time. As always, these periods do not really have a strict cut-off date and start date. The geometric period did not just change into the Archaic period overnight, neither did the Archaic to the Classical. In the same way that we see a transition from the 80s to the 90s and the 90s to the 2000s, style and technology do not just change suddenly, but gradually. This stands true for every era of history. Let's take a look at Sparta, a polis which is wrapped in complexity and often has attributes from the 1st century AD applied to archaic and classical Sparta, and vice versa. The Messenian War, the war which saw Sparta's subjection of Messenia and the implementation of the Helot class, happened in the 700 BCs. That is around 260 years before Leonidas fought at Thermopylae. Equally, when people take Plutarch's writings of Sparta and apply them to archaic and classical Sparta, there can be up to 500-year span of time. The issue comes that, of course, Sparta did not remain a static society from 700 BC to 100 AD, but with our modern trend of conflating Sparta as one static city, we project all sources writing about Sparta as though it applies the entire history of Sparta. This is problematic because if we did the same for the present, then Britain is still an empire, Germany is still ruled by a certain regime, and America still has slaves. Turning to military, people often confuse archaic and classical hoplites with those fighting under Alexander. But again, looking at Thermopylae in 480 and the Battle of Gaugamela in 331, that is a 149-year gap. For context, that would be like seeing a British soldier from the Zulu Wars fighting in Ukraine today, or an American Revolutionary soldier storming the beaches of Normandy in 1944. Of course, those sound like massive differences, and we do see a significantly quicker change in weapon technology, but the idea is the same. Here is a contrast of soldiers from the Bronze Age to the Hellenistic period, and they go under a wide change. Now, of course, other styles and renditions existed, but for our example, this will suffice. You can see a massive change from the Dendra panoply worn by the mid to late Bronze Age warrior into the archaic hoplite from the mid to late Archaic period, fading into the early classical hoplite that you'd be seeing around the Persian Wars, into the sort of mid and late classical of the Peloponnesian Wars, into the Hellenistic period Macedonian pikemen. To many people, these are all hoplites or ancient Greek soldiers, but this is a massive span of time. That is a 900-year period, In other words, comparing a knight from, say, the 1100s to a modern soldier today. That's the era of time that we are talking about. When people think of Achilles from the Siege of Troy as a classical hoplite, you were talking about an over 700-year difference. But we still lump them together as ancient Greek soldiers. Furthermore, let's look at certain famous Greek figures like Plato and Aristotle. These men lived in the late 400s to mid 300 BCs. Plato died approximately 131 years after the Greco-Persian Wars. In other words, that is a difference in time from 2025 to 1894. Even when we look at architectural staples of the ancient world like the Parthenon, they appear later than many assume. The current Acropolis was built around 440 BC, which means that the building we see today was not standing at the time of Marathon, Thermopylae and Plataea. I hope that you found this video interesting, and I hope it made you think more about the time that actually passes when we talk about the people of the past. Relating these events to times which are much closer to home, I think, really helps give some perspective to the study of history, and how vast a period of time people are talking about when speaking about ancient Greece. Thanks very much for watching this video, and a special thanks to our channel members who continually support the channel. If you yourself would like to support the channel, then of course checking out memberships is a massive help. If not, no problem at all. Just liking and subscribing is a massive help, and sharing these videos around to other people that might find them interesting does a lot as well. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.